Don't go out at night after 10. I had recently got married to the love of my life, Susan. We'd known each other for the better part of our lives, and she was my first friend when I moved to New Mexico. We were 8 years old back then, and we always hung out together. We fished, hiked, rode bikes together, you name it. We were inseparable. We had gotten married right out of high school and decided to move to a small town in Alabama to have a fresh start. When we got there, everything was beautiful. A forest surrounded the town, the air was fresh, kids rode around on bikes. Everywhere we looked reminded us of our childhood, and I knew that this was a place I would want to raise my future children. We drove around town to get an idea of how all the buildings were laid out. Eventually, we headed to our newly purchased house, and we pulled into the driveway. Our house was a 2-story building set on about an acre of land. The front yard looked pretty barren and could use some flowers to fill the space. We stepped out of the car and went around back, and it wasn't that great back there. Leaves were going to be needed to be raked up. Some sod was needed in areas, but overall it seemed fine, except for the fact that there was no fence separating the forest from our backyard. This worried me, because who knows what animals could be lurking in that forest. I didn't like the idea of a possibly dangerous animal wandering into our backyard. And that's when I noticed there were scratch marks on the back door. I tried to tell myself they were probably from the previous owner's dog, but the previous owner didn't have a dog, and the scratch marks were pretty high up on the door. I told myself that maybe an animal came and was scratching on the door like a bear, but that only made it worse. So I pushed it back of the mind and told myself I was going to have to build a fence. "Let's start unpacking," Susan said while walking back to the front of the house. I think she was nervous about the scratches too, like I was, but I went out front and helped unpack. It went by pretty quickly, mostly because we didn't have much, and by the time we got everything situated, it was 6:30ish, so we decided to have dinner. I wanted to take Susan out somewhere to eat and explore the town more. We got ready and headed out. "So, where do you want to go?" "Well, there was a restaurant called the Pita Pan that I saw on our way into town." "Then I guess that's where we are going." "Yeah. So, what did you think about that strange neighbor of ours?" "What do you mean?" "Well, when we were unpacking, I saw our neighbor out on her porch, watching us." "I didn't even notice." "Yeah, it was weird. She just kept staring." "Well, I guess we're just gonna have to deal with a weird neighbor." "Yeah, I guess so." Now I know how my parents felt when they had to talk about how to deal with their weird neighbors. I messed that up. We both laughed and kept talking about how it was weird being adults. We also talked about funny high school stories. It was great. And before we knew it, we were pulling into the Pita Pan. We parked and went in, and let me just say, the outside looked a lot better than the inside. If you had just looked at it from the street, the Pita Pan probably looked fine. But when you were in the parking lot, the outside looked like a worn-down brick bomb shelter. And when we went inside, it was dimly lit, and the tables and chairs looked like they hadn't been painted in ages. The bar area looked like it hadn't been dusted in forever. There was dust all over the shelves where the beers and wines were. And there was only one old lady sitting there. The only other person there was a man in a white dress shirt and black pants. He had a name tag that said John, and yes, he was our waiter and cook. We sat down at a table with menus, and John said that he would be right over. I looked around and I saw the old woman staring at us. I leaned over to my wife and whispered that the old lady at the bar was just looking at us. My wife glanced over and looked back at me and whispered to tell me that that was our weird neighbor. Sheesh. What do these people in town and this woman have with staring? I don't know. Then John, our server, came over. "Can I start you off with anything to drink?" I'll just have water." "Yeah, me too," said Susan. "Okay, got it. Do you two know what you guys will be getting tonight? Or do you still need a minute?" I'm not sure. We're new to town and we haven't been here before, so what would you recommend? Well, I would recommend the pita steak. It comes with mashed potatoes, steamed broccoli, and fountain drink if you want. It takes a while to cook, but it's totally worth the wait. I'll have one of those, yeah. Okay, and you? John said to Susan. I'll also have a pita steak. Okay, I'll have those cooked and out to you in a jiffy. Thank you. No problem. John walked back to the kitchen, and a moment after he entered, I saw a movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked over and saw that the old lady had stood up and was walking over to Susan and I. It surprised me how fast she walked because she looked like a twig in her 90s. Before we knew it, she was at our table and sitting down. My wife looked at me with a confused look, and all I could do was shrug my shoulders. So, you are new to town, she said. Yeah, we just got here today, said my wife. Well then, there's something you should know. What's that? Don't go out after 10. I repeat, do not. Why is that? I said. Just don't. It's not worth it. Why? I asked. It's not safe after 10. Why isn't it safe? It's a small town. How dangerous can it get here? I asked, getting a little nervous, because some random old lady was telling us not to go out after 10, and there was that fence that wasn't put up yet, so maybe an animal. I just didn't know. It gets dangerous out there because of Tico Techo, she said. What about this person? He used to be a person before the incident. What do you mean? I don't understand, I said. She sighed. Let me tell you a story. It all begins 55 years ago. There was a young man named Tico. He was handsome, way too young for me. Many girls in high school liked him, and he was the star of the high school soccer team. That year, he had set the school record for the fastest mile and 100-meter dash in track. He even got close to some world records. He absolutely adored running. It was his favorite thing ever. Every morning I'd see him start his daily run, and I'd offer him some lemonade. Then one day, a scout from Stanford came here because of the spreading news about Tico. He offered Tico a full ride scholarship to Stanford right after Tico had beat his own mile record at the last track event of the season. Of course, Tico accepted. He was set to leave next summer. It would have been sad watching him go if he ever left. A week before he was gonna head off, a terrible, terrible thing happened. Tico had gone out running later at night, around 10, and on his way home, he took a shortcut through the woods. When the police found him, he was barely alive. Some messed up person had shot him, then taken an axe to him from the stomach down. A lot of the flesh and bones of his legs were gone, and I mean gone as in no one knew where they were. And all the doctors could do to save Tico's life was to amputate the rest of his bottom half, which there wasn't much of. When he came to at the hospital, I was there with him and the rest of his family. We asked him first off if he was okay, and he told us he was better than ever. He always liked making everything a little bit happier when it was gloomy. We then asked him what he remembered. He told us he was attacked. He heard a crack and felt a searing pain in his shoulder. He told us he saw a man with a tattoo on his arm before everything went black. And everyone in town knew there was only one guy who had a tattoo on their arm. That was the butcher. We told Tico we would send the cops there immediately to go get the butcher, but Tico wanted to come with us to confront him. But when he went to stand up, his eyes got wide. He flipped up his blanket, and that's when he realized what had happened. It made him fall dead quiet. He didn't even cry, he just went silent. His eyes lost all their zing and emotion. They were empty. He lied back and stared at the ceiling, not moving. In that moment, he was broken. He never said another word from then on. "What happened to the butcher?" asked my wife. The cops went to the shop and did a check. They did find Tico's legs after a lab test that came back 3 days later. The lab test was of the ground beef. The worst part is, by the time they had gotten the results and had found out, only half of the ground beef was left from being sold, and the butcher was gone. The press had been eating up, that was a wrong choice of word, using the story, and we weren't able to keep Tico from learning what happened. Eventually, the cops found the butcher 5 years later. By then, the butcher had slaughtered many other people, and he was sent back here to be tried. The verdict was guilty, and he was given a death sentence. They put him in jail and were set to execute him 2 days after the trial. I went to visit Tico and found a newspaper lying on his bed showing the butcher was back to be tried. Tico was lying there. He had stopped trying a personal hygiene. He had really long hair. You might think the smell would be the worst, but it wasn't. It was his nails. They hadn't been clipped in 5 years. They were huge. They looked like something out of a horror show. He just stared at me, and something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it until I looked at his eyes. They weren't empty anymore. They were just filled with what I can only describe as cold. We all told him that the butcher was getting what he deserved, and yet Tico still didn't speak. The morning of the execution, Tico was gone. And when they went to get the butcher, he wasn't in his cell. A full-on manhunt ensued. Everyone was worried the butcher had escaped and taken Tico, but I knew it was far worse. What they found in the spot where Tico had first been attacked was a blood path. The butcher had been killed, decapitated. On his forehead was carved the message, "Don't go out after 10," signed with Tico Ticho, and the first 3 letters of his name, his first and last, were underlined. Everyone in town was horrified. No one would even go out, let alone past 8. And from then on, kids called Tico the killer. Tick, tick. That was the last time we ever saw Tico. At least anyone alive saw him. That's terrible. But that's 55 years ago. And you're telling us not to stay out past 10 because of something that happened 55 years ago? Susan said. Yes, I am. And it's true. She replied, I'm gonna need a little more than something that happened 55 years ago to convince me not to go out, said Susan. I looked at my wife, trying to non-verbally communicate to her to stop. I didn't think she understood, or even listened. My wife turned back as if to say something to the old lady, but before she could, the old lady said, You want more evidence? The Barker family. Parents got in a fight 2 months after the incident. The father stomped outside saying he needed fresh air, and went out on the front porch. It was around 10:15 when he did this. The next day, the wife found, painted in blood, on the hood of the car, the words, "He shouldn't have gone out after 10." She then saw him in the car with his eyes gouged out and throat slit. The autopsy found that his vocal cords were torn by something like claws or nails. and that was why no one ever heard him scream. However, the wife said that she heard what sounded like keys on a keyboard or tapping of nails on metal. The newlywed couple, about 7 years ago, were on their honeymoon, passing through this town at night. Officers found their car broken down at the side of the road with no one around. The police popped the hood to see what was wrong, and they found the husband crushed in there. They later found the wife hanging from a tree at the forest line. Carved in the tree she was hanging from were the words, "Don't go out after 10. There are more cases, but I think I've made my point clear," the old lady said as she stood up and hastily walked out of the restaurant. "I think I've lost my appetite," I said. "Really? You're just gonna believe some crazy lady? What if she isn't crazy?" She is. Just, you know what, let's just go home," she suggested. I was sort of grateful. We told John, the waiter, we had to go, and right as we were leaving, he told us not to stay out too late. This frightened me. On the ride home, we sat in silence. I didn't know what to say. I just kept looking at the clock. It said 9:33, and by the time we got home, it was 9:55. "We should hurry in." You don't believe her, do you?" "No," I said, which was sort of true. I mean, it was mostly a lie. She ruined our dinner, and you believe her? Look, I don't know what to... I just don't want to take any risks. You know what? There's no risk. It was 55 years ago. Look, I'm just going to stay out here and prove that it's fake. Please, just come in. No, you're just scared, aren't you? You're supposed to be the man. What are you doing? Just come inside. No, I'm going to prove that she was just wanted to ruin our night. She wanted to be center of attention, be that one neighbor. Fine, I'm going to bed, I said angrily, and I got out of the car and walked into the house. She was probably right anyways, and she'd be fine. I didn't even brush my teeth. I just crawled into bed and laid there trying to sleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about Tico Tico, or Tick Tick, or whatever. That's when I heard it, the ticking sound of a clock, or nails on metal. I quickly jumped up to run outside to my wife, but before I could, I realized it was just the clock in my room, which read 10:08 in green numbers. I was obviously overreacting. I just needed to sleep. I lied down and forced my brain to take a break. The next morning, I woke up alone. My wife wasn't in our room. I walked downstairs expecting to see her making breakfast or something, but she wasn't there either. I remembered last night, and I felt my stomach sink. I ran to the front porch and opened it. I stepped out and I saw the car parked in the driveway. No one was in it. My heart was starting to race. I had to call the police. I whipped around and ran inside. "Where did I leave my phone?" I shouted out loud to myself. Then I remembered. It was on the nightstand by the window in my room. I raced upstairs and burst into my room. I ran over, tried to grab my phone, but knocked it off the stand along with the electric clock. I bent down, picked up my phone, and as I stood up, I looked out the window, hoping she was okay, but that's when I saw my wife. She was looking back in at me, face pressed against the glass in a goofy way, like she was trying to show me that I was wrong. I would have felt relief if it wasn't for the fact that I was on the second floor and that electric clocks don't tick.